The moving truck pulled up in front of their new house on Pine Hill Road, a picture-perfect suburban street with manicured lawns and white picket fences. Aaron and Elena stepped out of their car, taking a moment to breathe in the crisp air. This was their fresh start, a chance to build a life in a community they hoped would welcome them. Aaron squeezed Elena's hand as they looked up at their new home, a charming two-story house that they had worked hard to afford. "Ready for this?" Aaron asked with a hopeful smile. "As ready as I'll ever be," Elena replied, glancing around at the neighborhood. Most of the houses looked similar, neat, orderly, with an air of traditional comfort. But something else lingered in the atmosphere, an undercurrent of curiosity and judgment. As they began unloading boxes, they noticed a man standing on the lawn next door, arms crossed over his chest, watching them intently. Aaron met his gaze, offering a friendly nod, but the man didn't reciprocate. Instead, he marched over, his expression hard. "Moving in?" the man asked, his tone sharp. "Yep, we're the new neighbors," Aaron replied, extending his hand. "I'm Aaron, and this is my wife, Elena." The man glanced at Aaron's hand, but didn't take it. "George Thompson," he said curtly. "Been living here for over 20 years. This is a quiet neighborhood. We like to keep it that way." Elena felt a knot form in her stomach. George's words were polite enough, but the way he said them made it clear. He wasn't happy they were here. Aaron, sensing the tension, kept his voice calm. "We're looking forward to some peace and quiet ourselves," Aaron replied evenly. George's eyes flicked between Aaron and Elena before settling on the moving truck. "I'll be keeping an eye on things," he muttered, before turning and walking back to his house without another word. Elena exhaled slowly. "Well, that was welcoming," she said with a touch of sarcasm. Aaron forced a smile, though his eyes betrayed a hint of concern. "First impressions can be deceiving. Let's give it time." But as the day went on, they couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Other neighbors came out to look at the new arrivals, some offering polite waves but keeping their distance. It was subtle, but there was a sense of unspoken judgment in the air. They were the newcomers, and more than that, they were different. That evening, as they unpacked boxes in their living room, Elena glanced out the window. She saw George standing on his porch, watching their house. She shivered slightly, despite the warmth inside. "Do you think it'll always be like this?" she asked quietly. Aaron sighed, wrapping his arms around her. "I hope not. We just have to show them who we really are. It'll take time, but we can make this place our home." They finished unpacking in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. They had known that moving into this neighborhood might come with challenges, but facing them so soon was disheartening. Still, Aaron and Elena were determined to settle in and become part of the community, no matter how long it took. As the sun set on their first day in Northgate, they sat together on the couch, watching the neighborhood from their window. It was quiet now, the streetlights casting long shadows on the pavement. Aaron could still see George's silhouette through the window of the house next door. The man seemed like a fixture, an immovable object that they would have to learn to live alongside. But Aaron and Elena had faced obstacles before, and they knew this was just the beginning. They were here to build a life, and they wouldn't let the initial coldness of their new neighbors deter them. Aaron leaned in to kiss Elena's forehead. "We'll figure this out," he murmured. Elena nodded, snuggling into his embrace. "Yeah, we will. Together." Outside, George watched their house, his face a mask of quiet disapproval. To him, Aaron and Elena were not just new neighbors, they were outsiders. And in his eyes, outsiders meant change, something he was not willing to accept easily. But the couple inside remained unaware of the full extent of his resentment. All they knew was that they had just taken the first step into a new chapter of their lives, one that was already proving to be more challenging than they had anticipated. The next morning, Aaron woke up early. As he looked out the window, he saw the neglected sports court at the edge of the neighborhood park. It was overgrown with weeds and had cracks running through the concrete. To most, it was an eyesore, but to Aaron, it was an opportunity. He turned to Elena, who was still waking up, and smiled. "I think I know how we can start making this place feel like home." Elena glanced at the court and then back at Aaron. "You think they'll let us do it?" "Only one way to find out," he replied. Over breakfast, they discussed their plan. Aaron had always believed in the power of sports to bring people together. He and Elena decided to start by cleaning up the old court and inviting the neighborhood kids to join in some free sports activities. It was a simple gesture, but it was their way of reaching out. That afternoon, Aaron and Elena went to work. They cleared away the weeds, swept the court, and patched up the cracks as best they could. It was hard work, but it felt good. As they worked, a few curious eyes peeked from behind curtains and over hedges. They were being watched, but no one came over to offer help. By the time they finished, the court looked more inviting, even if it was still a bit rough around the edges. They posted a notice on the community board. Free sports activities, all ages welcome, with the date and time of their first session. When the day of the event arrived, Aaron and Elena set up some basic equipment, a basketball, a soccer ball, and a couple of cones. They waited, unsure if anyone would show up. For the first 15 minutes, it was just the two of them, standing on the court with hopeful smiles. Then, slowly, a few kids began to wander over, their parents watching from a distance. A young boy named Tommy, no older than 8, was the first to join. He dribbled the basketball timidly, looking up at Aaron for approval. "Nice dribble, Tommy," Aaron encouraged, his voice warm. "Let's see what else you can do." As more kids joined in, the energy on the court began to change. Laughter echoed across the park as Aaron and Elena led them through simple drills and games. Parents stood at the edges, arms crossed or hands on hips, watching closely. Elena noticed George standing in the background, his expression unreadable. By the end of the afternoon, they had a small group of kids running around, enjoying themselves. It was a modest turnout, but it was a start. Aaron and Elena exchanged a look of triumph. They had planted the first seed. After the session, as the children went back to their homes with smiles on their faces, George approached the court. Aaron and Elena tensed slightly, unsure of what to expect. "Well," George began, his tone laced with skepticism, "seems like you've stirred up quite a bit of excitement around here. Not sure this is what the neighborhood needs." Aaron met his gaze calmly. "We just want to give the kids a place to play. Something positive. It's not about stirring things up, George. It's about building a community." George snorted, unconvinced. "We'll see about that. Just remember, not everyone here is as eager for change as you are." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Aaron and Elena standing on the court. Elena sighed. "Do you think he'll ever come around?" Aaron shook his head slowly. "I don't know. But we can't let one person dictate how we live our lives here. We did something good today, and that's what matters." They packed up their equipment in silence, aware that they had a long road ahead. Still, they had made a small crack in the wall that surrounded this community, and it was a start. Aaron glanced over at the park as they walked back to their house, seeing a few kids still playing on the court they had worked so hard to clean up. Elena slipped her hand into Aaron's. "One step at a time," she said softly. He nodded. One step at a time. Days passed, and the sports activities began to catch on. Every afternoon, more kids joined the games at the revitalized court. Aaron and Elena were starting to become familiar faces in the neighborhood. However, not everyone was happy about it. George's disapproving glares hadn't softened, and it became clear he was not just a bystander. He was an obstacle. One afternoon, as Aaron was setting up for a soccer game, he noticed a girl standing at the edge of the park, partially hidden behind a tree. She was watching intently, her eyes following every movement on the court. Aaron recognized her instantly. It was George's daughter, Emily. She was around 16, with a natural athletic build and an expression that showed she desperately wanted to join in. Elena nudged Aaron. "That's George's daughter, right?" "Yeah," Aaron nodded, his eyes not leaving Emily. He could see the longing in her stance, the way she shifted on her feet, almost as if she was trying to summon the courage to step forward. "Do you think we should invite her over?" Elena asked, her voice hopeful. "Not yet," Aaron replied thoughtfully. "If George is keeping her away, there's probably a lot more to this." As the game went on, Emily stayed in her spot, watching silently. It was obvious she was captivated by the activity on the court. At one point, a ball rolled toward her. She picked it up instinctively, her fingers gripping the leather for a brief moment before she rolled it back to the kids, her eyes glancing nervously toward her house. Aaron followed her gaze and saw George standing on his porch, arms crossed, staring directly at them. A chill ran down Aaron's spine. George's expression was cold and unyielding, like a gatekeeper blocking Emily's path to something she clearly loved. Aaron could see it in her eyes, the same passion for sports that he had felt growing up. But for Emily, it was being stifled, held back by her father's prejudice. After the session ended and the kids dispersed, Aaron and Elena walked back to their house. They didn't speak of Emily immediately, but her image lingered in their minds. That evening, while they were cleaning up after dinner, Elena finally broke the silence. "You saw how much she wanted to join, right? She's got talent, Aaron, you can see it." "Yeah," Aaron replied, drying his hands on a towel. "But it's not up to us. George is the one keeping her away, and we can't just force it." "But what if we could show him?" Elena asked. "What if we could find a way to change his mind?" Aaron sighed, leaning against the counter. "George isn't the kind of guy who changes his mind easily, especially not about something like this. But maybe if Emily keeps showing up, if she keeps watching, he'll start to see what he's denying her." Meanwhile, in George's house, a storm was brewing. Emily had returned home and immediately faced her father's wrath. "How many times have I told you to stay away from them?" George's voice echoed through the house. "Those people aren't who you think they are." Emily, for the first time, didn't back down. "You don't even know them, Dad. They're just trying to help. I want to play. I'm good at it, and you know it." George's face flushed with anger. "This isn't about playing games, Emily. It's about knowing your place and understanding that not everyone belongs everywhere." Emily's eyes filled with tears, but they didn't fall. "Maybe it's you who doesn't belong," she said quietly before turning and running to her room. George stood in the hallway, fists clenched, breathing heavily. He was losing control, not just of the situation, but of his daughter. For the first time, he felt the icy edge of fear. His world, the world he had known and controlled for so long, was starting to crack. Back at Aaron and Elena's, the couple sat on their porch, the cool evening air wrapping around them. They knew they were challenging more than just social norms. They were challenging the beliefs that had shaped people like George for decades. "We have to be patient," Aaron said, breaking the silence. "For Emily's sake and for this neighborhood, change doesn't happen overnight, and George isn't going to soften easily." Elena leaned against his shoulder. "Then we keep doing what we're doing. One day, he'll have to see what he's holding her back from." Aaron nodded, staring into the darkening sky. "I hope so, Elena. For Emily's sake, I really hope so." In the following weeks, Aaron and Elena's sports activities continued to grow. Word spread about the positive environment they had created, and soon even more children were showing up at the court. What started as a modest gathering turned into a daily event that the kids eagerly anticipated. Some parents began to linger longer, chatting with Aaron and Elena, beginning to see them not just as outsiders, but as valuable members of the community. Aaron and Elena worked hard to make each session special, introducing new drills, games, and even small competitions to keep the kids engaged. The court, once a neglected piece of asphalt, now buzzed with life every afternoon. The laughter and cheers of children filled the air, creating a sense of unity that had been missing in Northgate for far too long. However, amidst this growing enthusiasm, George's resentment only deepened. Every day he watched from his porch, his face a mask of disapproval. He hated how the neighborhood was changing, how Aaron and Elena were becoming fixtures in a place he believed they didn't belong. He especially hated the way Emily's eyes lit up whenever she watched from the sidelines, longing to join in. One Saturday afternoon, the crowd around the court was larger than ever. Parents had brought chairs and were sitting in small groups, talking and laughing as they watched their kids play. It felt almost like a community festival, something that Northgate hadn't seen in years. As the soccer game wrapped up, Aaron gathered the kids for a group huddle. "Great job today, everyone," he said, high-fiving them one by one. "Remember, it's not just about winning, it's about how we play together. That's what makes a team." The parents clapped, and Aaron noticed a few more nods of approval. It was progress, small but significant. Yet he also noticed Emily standing on the outskirts, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Her eyes were fixed on the ball, her body tense with the desire to be a part of it all. Then George made his move. He marched across the park, his face set in a scowl. The chatter among the parents died down as they watched him approach. Aaron stood up straight, ready for whatever confrontation was about to unfold. "All right, that's enough," George barked as he reached the edge of the court. "This has gone on long enough. You're turning this place into a circus." Aaron held his ground. "We're just trying to bring the community together, George. The kids are having fun, and it's good for them." George scoffed. "Good for them? You think you can just waltz in here and change everything? Not everyone wants your kind of change." The atmosphere grew tense. Parents exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of what to do or say. Emily, who had been creeping closer, froze in place, her eyes wide with both fear and anger. Elena stepped forward. "George, we're not here to cause trouble. We're here to make this a better place for everyone, including you and Emily." "Leave my daughter out of this," George snapped, his voice rising. "You don't know anything about us. You don't belong here, and you never will." The sting of his words hung in the air, creating an uncomfortable silence. Aaron took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "George, this isn't about us. It's about giving these kids a chance to play, to learn, and to grow, including Emily. She's got talent, and it's a shame to see it go to waste." George's face turned red with fury. "I'll decide what's best for my daughter. Not you, not anyone else. You stay away from her. You hear me?" He turned abruptly and stormed off, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. Emily watched him go, her face a mixture of embarrassment and anger. She looked at Aaron and Elena, then at the other kids, before turning and running back toward her house. Aaron felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He had hoped that George might start to see the benefits of what they were doing, but it was clear now that he was a man entrenched in his own beliefs, unwilling to even entertain the possibility of change. Elena put a hand on Aaron's arm. "He's not going to back down easily," she whispered. "I know," Aaron replied, his gaze fixed on the place where Emily had stood moments before. "But we can't give up now. Not when we've come this far." The parents slowly began to disperse, murmuring amongst themselves. Some offered quiet words of support to Aaron and Elena as they left, while others left without saying anything, their expressions clouded with uncertainty. Later that evening, as they sat on their porch, Elena leaned her head on Aaron's shoulder. "Do you think we're making a difference?" Aaron sighed. "We are. But sometimes making a difference means facing resistance. George isn't going to change overnight. But maybe, just maybe, others will start to see the truth." Elena nodded, taking comfort in his words. They knew this fight was bigger than just a game on a court. It was about breaking down walls that had been built up over years. And sometimes those walls didn't come down easily. As they sat in the quiet of the evening, they both knew that the real challenge was yet to come. George wasn't just a man set in his ways. He was a symbol of the resistance they were up against. But they had seen the spark in Emily's eyes, the yearning to be free from the constraints placed on her by her father's prejudice. "We keep going," Aaron said finally, his voice firm. "For Emily, for all of them." The day of the tournament arrived with the sun shining brightly over Northgate. Aaron and Elena had put everything into preparing for this event. They wanted it to be more than just a game. They wanted it to be a celebration of the community. Flyers had been posted, invitations sent out, and even some of the more hesitant parents had agreed to come and support. It was a chance for the neighborhood to come together in a way it hadn't in years. The court was buzzing with excitement. Aaron set up cones for the soccer match, while Elena arranged a small refreshments table with snacks and drinks. Kids ran around, warming up, their laughter filling the air. The sight of so many people coming together was exactly what they had hoped for. It was a glimpse of what Northgate could be, if given the chance. But amidst the cheerful chaos, Aaron noticed Emily standing at the edge of the crowd, her face a mixture of determination and fear. She was wearing a pair of athletic shoes and a worn-out soccer jersey, clearly ready to play. However, George was nowhere in sight, and Aaron could only imagine the fight that had ensued at their house that morning. As the tournament was about to start, Emily made her way over to Aaron and Elena. She was trembling slightly, but there was a fire in her eyes that Aaron hadn't seen before. "I want to play," she said, her voice firm despite the quiver in her hands. "I know my dad said no, but I have to do this." Elena knelt down to her level. "Emily, we'd love for you to play, but are you sure you're ready to face him?" Emily nodded. "I'm not hiding anymore. I want to be out there." Aaron exchanged a glance with Elena, who gave a small nod of encouragement. "All right," he said, "you're on the team." The games began and the energy on the court was electric. Emily played with a passion that made it clear she was born for this. She dribbled the ball with skill, weaving between players with ease. The crowd cheered her on, and for the first time, she felt like she was part of something bigger than herself. Aaron and Elena watched proudly from the sidelines, knowing this moment was what they had been working toward. But then, halfway through the tournament, George appeared. He stood at the far end of the park, his eyes locked onto the court, his face twisted in fury as he saw Emily in the thick of the game. Without a word, he started marching toward the court, his fists clenched at his sides. The game came to a sudden halt as everyone noticed George storming onto the court. He grabbed Emily by the arm, yanking her away from the other players. "What do you think you're doing?" he shouted, his voice echoing across the court. "I told you to stay away from this." Emily tried to pull her arm free, her voice cracking. "No, Dad, I want to play. This is what I love. Why can't you see that?" George's face turned red with rage. "This is not what we do. We don't associate with people like this. They're using you, and you're too young to understand." The crowd watched in stunned silence, unsure of how to react. Aaron took a step forward, his voice calm but firm. "George, let her go. She's not a child you can control like this. She has a right to be here, just like everyone else." "Stay out of this, Almo," George barked, his eyes flashing with anger. "This is between me and my daughter." "No, it's not," Emily shouted, tears streaming down her face. "This is about you and your hate. You don't care about me. You just care about what people think." The words hung in the air, raw and piercing. George froze, his grip on Emily loosening. For a moment, the mask of anger slipped, revealing the fear and confusion underneath. He looked around, seeing the eyes of the community on him, the judgment, the pity. He had never felt so isolated, so exposed. Emily stepped back, looking him in the eyes. "I'm not going to let you ruin this for me," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "I'm going to play." With that, she turned and walked back to the center of the court. Aaron signaled for the game to resume, and the kids started moving again, the cheers of the crowd slowly building back up. George stood there, watching his daughter slip away from him, realizing in that moment that he had lost more than just a battle. He had lost the respect of his daughter and the community. He stood there for a few moments longer, his shoulders sagging as the weight of his actions bore down on him. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving the court and the cheers behind. Emily played the rest of the tournament with a fire that surprised everyone. She scored goals, made assists, and was a key player on the field. By the end of the day, she was drenched in sweat, but her smile was brighter than the sun overhead. Aaron and Elena cheered along with everyone else, feeling a swell of pride for what they had witnessed. As the tournament ended, Emily approached Aaron and Elena, breathing heavily, but with a look of pure joy on her face. "Thank you," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "Thank you for letting me be a part of this." Elena hugged her tightly. "You did this, Emily. You showed everyone who you are." Aaron nodded. "You were amazing out there. And this is just the beginning." Emily glanced back at the path where her father had disappeared, her expression sobering slightly. "I don't know what's going to happen when I go home," she admitted, "but I don't regret it." "You stood up for yourself," Aaron said gently. "That's something to be proud of." As the crowd began to disperse, Aaron and Elena stood on the now empty court, watching as families walked away with smiles on their faces. They had taken a big step today. The community had witnessed not just a game, but a statement, a stand against division and for the right to belong. Elena leaned into Aaron. "We did it," she said softly. He wrapped his arm around her. "No," he corrected. "Emily did it. And that's just the start of the change." The tournament had left an indelible mark on the community. In the days that followed, whispers about the confrontation between George and Emily spread throughout Northgate. Some residents expressed sympathy for George, understanding the challenge of a father seeing his authority questioned. Others, however, saw a deeper issue, a man clinging to outdated beliefs, struggling to accept that the world around him was changing. Emily continued to join the sports activities. Her confidence grew with each session, and the kids quickly accepted her as a natural leader on the court. But for Aaron and Elena, the situation with George was far from resolved. They knew that the fallout from that day would have repercussions, and they were ready for whatever came next. One evening, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a warm glow over the neighborhood, There was a knock on Aaron and Elena's door. Aaron opened it to find George standing there, his face drawn and tired. There was no anger in his eyes now, only weariness. "Can we talk?" George asked, his voice lacking its usual edge. Aaron hesitated for a moment, then stepped aside to let him in. George entered the house, his eyes briefly scanning the living room, taking in the family photos and the trophies on the shelves, evidence of Aaron and Elena's lifelong dedication to sports. It was a side of them he had never bothered to understand. They sat in the living room, the silence heavy between them. Elena joined them, sitting beside Aaron, her expression cautious yet open. George rubbed his hands together, struggling to find the right words. I want to talk about Emily." Aaron nodded, keeping his voice neutral. "Go ahead." George sighed, the sound filled with years of pent-up frustration. "I know I haven't been welcoming. I've had my reasons. But seeing Emily out there, she loves it, and it scares me." "Why does it scare you?" Elaine asked gently. George looked at her, his eyes pained. "Because I can't protect her from everything. I know what it's like out there. People judge you. They look at you differently. I've spent my whole life trying to keep this neighborhood the way it is, the way it was. I thought I was protecting her by keeping things the same. But things don't stay the same, George," Aaron said quietly. "The world changes and so do people. You can't shelter Emily forever. You saw her out there. She's strong, she's capable, and she needs to find her own path." George's gaze dropped to the floor. "I know," he admitted, his voice cracking, "but I don't know how to let go. She's my little girl. I just want what's best for her. Maybe what's best for her is to let her decide what makes her happy," Elena suggested. "Emily has a passion for sports. You saw it yourself. You can't hold her back because of your fears." George slumped back in his chair, looking utterly defeated. "I've already lost her, haven't I?" Aaron shook his head. "No, you haven't lost her. But you have a chance here. A chance to support her and show her that you're willing to try to understand. It's not too late." George sat in silence, the weight of Aaron's words settling over him. He had always seen himself as the protector, the guardian of tradition and values. But now, for the first time, he was forced to confront the reality that those very values were driving a wedge between him and the person he loved most in the world. "I don't know if I can change," George confessed, his voice barely a whisper. "Change isn't about becoming someone different," Aaron replied. "It's about growing, about seeing things from a new perspective. You don't have to change who you are at your core, but you do need to see what's important to the people you care about." George looked up at Aaron. The hostility that had once filled his eyes replaced with uncertainty. For a man who had spent his entire life building walls, the idea of letting them down was terrifying. But the image of Emily, her face full of life and determination, was etched into his mind. He realized that if he didn't at least try, he would lose her for good. "What do I do?" George asked, his voice trembling. It was the first time he had ever asked Aaron for guidance. "You start by listening to her," Aaron said simply. "Let her tell you what she wants. Show her that you're willing to be there for her, even if it's not what you envisioned." George nodded slowly, the enormity of his task weighing on him. It wasn't going to be easy, and he knew that. But for the first time, he was willing to take that step, however small it might be. He stood up, looking at Aaron and Elena. "Thank you," he said awkwardly. I need to go talk to Emily." They watched as George left, his shoulders hunched as if carrying the weight of years of stubbornness and pride. It was a small step, but it was a step nonetheless. Aaron and Elena exchanged a glance, a mixture of hope and caution in their eyes. Elena let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Do you think he'll actually change?" "I don't know," Aaron admitted. "But today, he showed up, and sometimes that's the hardest part." As they watched George walk away, they knew that this was far from over. Change was a slow and painful process, especially for someone like George. But there was a crack in the armor now, a small opening where light could shine through. For the first time, Aaron and Elena felt that maybe, just maybe, they were on the brink of something transformative. Not just for Emily, but for the entire neighborhood. The days after George's visit to Aaron and Elena were tense, There were no immediate signs of change, no grand gestures or apologies. But something was different. George was quieter, less confrontational. He spent more time inside his house, and when he was outside, he watched the court not with anger, but with a look that bordered on contemplation. Emily continued to join the sports sessions every afternoon. With each passing day, her confidence grew, and so did her leadership on the court. The other kids looked up to her, not just because of her skills, but because of her courage. She had stood up to her father, defied the expectations placed upon her, and in doing so, she had become a symbol of strength for everyone around her. Aaron and Elena noticed the shift in the neighborhood as well. More parents were bringing their kids to the court, not just dropping them off, but staying to watch, chat, and even participate. The once fragmented community was starting to knit itself together through the common thread of sports and the values Aaron and Elena had been fostering: teamwork, respect, and inclusion. One afternoon, as the kids were practicing for an upcoming scrimmage, George appeared at the edge of the park. Unlike before, he didn't march in with anger. Instead, he stood there, hands in his pockets, his gaze fixed on Emily. She noticed him too, and for a moment their eyes met. There was no anger in her expression, only a wary curiosity. Aaron walked over to George, keeping his tone neutral. "You're welcome to stay and watch," he offered. George hesitated, his eyes flicking from Aaron to the court where Emily was playing. Finally, he gave a curt nod. "I'll stay." It was a small step, but it felt monumental. Aaron watched as George took a seat on one of the benches at the sidelines. He didn't speak to anyone, didn't cheer or clap, but he was there. And that, in itself, was something. Elena joined Aaron, watching George from a distance. "Do you think this is his way of trying?" she asked quietly. "Maybe," Aaron replied. "Sometimes just showing up is the hardest part." The game went on with Emily taking center stage. She played with a focus and determination that made her stand out among her peers. Every now and then Aaron glanced at George. The man's expression was unreadable, but he was watching, really watching his daughter play. After the practice ended, the kids gathered around Aaron for their usual post-game huddle. He praised their efforts and highlighted Emily's contributions without singling her out too much. As they dispersed, Emily approached George cautiously. There was an awkward silence between them, the kind that follows months of unspoken words and unexpressed feelings. "You were good out there," George said finally, his voice gruff. Emily looked at him, surprised. "Thanks." George shifted uncomfortably, the weight of his pride and stubbornness holding him back, but then he took a deep breath. I didn't understand how much this meant to you. I was wrong to try to stop you." Emily's eyes softened. She knew this wasn't a full apology, but it was more than she ever expected from him. "I just wanted you to see that this is important to me," she said quietly. "It's not about them or anyone else. It's about what I love." George nodded, his eyes dropping to the ground. "I see that now." There was a long pause, and then, almost tentatively, George asked, "Mind if I come watch again?" Emily's face lit up with a small smile. "I'd like that." Aaron and Elena watched the exchange from a distance, feeling a sense of relief and cautious optimism. It was not a perfect resolution, but it was a beginning. They knew that George's journey would be long and difficult, but the fact that he was willing to take even a small step meant that change was possible. In the weeks that followed, George began showing up to the practices more regularly. He still kept to himself, sitting quietly on the sidelines, but his presence alone spoke volumes. He was trying, in his own way, to bridge the gap he had created. And as he watched Emily grow into her role as a leader on the court, he began to see the world through a different lens, one where inclusion and diversity were strengths, not threats. The neighborhood, too, continued to evolve. The court became the heart of the community, a place where people from different backgrounds and beliefs came together. Barriers that had once seemed insurmountable were slowly being chipped away, not through grand speeches or declarations, but through the simple act of playing together, of sharing a space and a purpose. One evening, after a particularly spirited game, George approached Aaron and Elena. He seemed nervous, almost like a man about to step into unknown territory. "I was thinking," he began awkwardly, "maybe I could help out with the next tournament, just with setting things up, you know." Aaron exchanged a glance with Elena, a silent agreement passing between them. They knew how much it had taken for George to make this offer. "We'd appreciate that, George," Aaron replied warmly. "The kids would too." As George walked away, Aaron turned to Elena, a smile tugging at his lips. "You know," he said, "I think we're finally seeing the start of real change." Elena nodded, her eyes following George's retreating figure. "It's not about winning or losing, it's about finding a way to belong for everyone." They stood there watching as the sun set over the park, casting a golden hue over the court that had become a symbol of unity. The road ahead was still long, and there would be more challenges, more moments of doubt. But for now they had hope, and sometimes hope was all you needed to start building a better future. A month had passed since George started showing up at the practices, and the air in Northgate had changed. The tensions that had once hung heavily over the neighborhood had lifted, replaced by a newfound sense of unity. The court was now more than just a place for games. It had become a gathering point, a place where neighbors met, connected, and grew together. Aaron and Elena had organized one final event before the summer ended, a community celebration. It wasn't just a tournament this time. It was a day-long festival with food, music, and games for all ages. The entire neighborhood had been buzzing with excitement in the days leading up to it. On the day of the celebration, the park was transformed. Tables lined with food and drinks stretched along the sidelines and colorful banners hung from the trees. Kids ran around with balloons while parents chatted and laughed, enjoying the warm, sunny day. It was everything Aaron and Elena had hoped for when they first decided to make this place their home. George arrived early, carrying a fold-out table and some chairs. He still moved a bit awkwardly, like a man unsure of his place. But today there was a noticeable lightness in his step. Emily ran up to him, her face glowing with joy. "Dad, can you help set up the water station?" she asked, pointing to an empty spot near the refreshment table. George nodded, a small smile breaking across his face. "Sure, kiddo, let's get to work." As the day progressed, the atmosphere only grew more festive. Aaron and Elena moved through the crowd, greeting neighbors and ensuring everything ran smoothly. They saw George laughing with some of the other parents, a sight that would have been unimaginable just a few months ago. Emily was in her element, organizing games for the younger kids, her eyes shining with happiness. The highlight of the day was the final game, a friendly match where everyone could participate, regardless of skill or age. Aaron, Elena, Emily, and even George found themselves on the field. There were no teams, no competition, just a group of people enjoying the moment, bound together by the simple joy of play. As the game went on, Aaron caught a glimpse of George running alongside Emily, the two of them laughing as they chased the ball. It was a fleeting moment, but it spoke volumes. It was proof that people could change, that even the deepest divides could be bridged with time, patience, and understanding. When the sun began to set, casting a warm, golden light over the park, Aaron called everyone to gather around. He stood in the middle of the court, looking at the faces around him, faces that had once been filled with doubt, fear, and even hostility. Today, those faces were different. They were relaxed, smiling, hopeful. "I just want to say," Aaron began, his voice carrying across the court, "thank you. Thank you for making this community what it is today. We've come a long way and we've still got a journey ahead. But today, we celebrate how far we've come together." The crowd erupted in applause, cheers echoing into the evening. Aaron felt Elena's hands slip into his, and he squeezed it, feeling a wave of gratitude and love wash over him. They had done it. They had built something beautiful in a place where they were once seen as outsiders. As the celebration continued, George approached Aaron and Elena. He looked at them, his expression sincere, if a bit unsure. "I just wanted to say thank you for everything you've done for Emily and for me." Aaron nodded, a warm smile on his face. "We're glad you're here, George. It means a lot." For the first time in what felt like forever, George smiled back, a genuine smile. He looked around at the community, at his daughter laughing with her friends, and realized that this was what he had been afraid of losing all along. But instead of losing, he had gained so much more. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the lights around the court flickered on, the neighborhood continued to celebrate. They were no longer just a group of people living on the same street. They were a community, diverse, united, and stronger than ever. Aaron and Elena stood together, watching the scene with contented hearts. This was the life they had dreamed of, a life they had built not just for themselves, but for everyone around them. And as they held each other close, they knew that this was just the beginning of a future filled with hope, unity, and the unbreakable bonds forged through the simple, beautiful game of life. Thank you for joining us on this journey of transformation and unity through the power of sports. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to our channel for more inspiring tales like this one. And we'd love to hear from you. Do you have a story where sports changed your life or brought people together? Share it in the comments below, and let's keep the conversation going. Your story could be the next one that inspires our community.